Hello dear students. For today's topic, for our last topic in our fourth quarter, we have the probability. First thing, what is probability? So before we identify or determine probability, let's have our learning competency. So our learning competency here is to illustrate an experiment, outcome, sample space, and the event. And we have to count number of occurrences of outcome in experiment, especially in table, tree diagram, systematic listing, and lastly, the fundamental counting principle. So here's our unpacked learning competency. So we have to define the basic probability terms like the experiment, outcome, sample space, and the event. And we have to enumerate also the outcomes in sample space or in event using the systematic listing and fundamental counting principle. And especially we need to do also to enumerate the outcomes in sample space or in event using the table and the tree diagram. And especially for the last thing is to illustrate and counts number of occurrences of outcome in experiment and fundamental counting principles. So now let's start. First thing we have the probability. What is probability? Probability is the chance that something will happen. Events cannot be predicted with total certainty. We can say how likely they are to happen. So we can relate probability, it also known as the possibilities or the possible chances that you will get something for it. So for example, what will be the probability or the possible solution or possible results that will come out when you toss a coin? So, dalawa lang yung chances niyan. It will become heads or tail. Later on, dagdagan pa natin yung examples. So before that, let's now proceed to the probability experiment. Sir, ano po ba yung probability experiment? Probability experiment is a chance process that leads to a well-defined result called an outcome. So for example, the experiment in science, di ba? We do an experiment. So, we are looking for that experiment is the outcome. Ano yung kalalabasan? Yun po yung pinopoint natin na experiment, which is the result or the outcome. And example of that is yun nga, flipping of a coin or tossing a coin. And rolling a die. Sir, ano po yung rolling a die? Yung isang dice, kaya nga siya isa lang kaya tinawag lang siyang die. So pag ni-roll mo siya, what will be the possible effects or the possible outcome that will result when you roll a die? We have only 6, di ba? Siyempre, pwedeng 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Next, so we have now the outcome from the probability experiment. What is outcome? Outcome is the result of a single trial of an experiment. So, sir, ano po yung sinasabing single trial dyan? So, yung mga posibleng mangyayari doon sa isang experiment. For example, single trial is ibig sabihin isang beses mo lang siyang pwedeng gawin. For example, when you flip a coin, ano yung pwedeng lumabas doon? It may be a heads or tails only. Or head and tail. Di ba? Kung sa Tagalog, pwede lang siyang tao or ibon. And here it is. So, for example, that we give example from our last slide. So, we have flipping a coin, we have the head and tail. Sabi ko nga. When you roll a die, pwedeng lumabas lang doon is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Yan po yung kadalasan or madalas nating makikitang example or problems when we call probability. Okay, now let's proceed to next, which is the sample space. Sir, ano naman po yung sample space? Sample space here is the set of all the possible outcomes or sample points. Sir, ano po yung possible outcomes? Lahat ng posibleng mangyari or lahat ng posibleng sagot, kailangan yun yung sinasabing sample space. For example, ilan yung sample space natin dun sa flipping a coin? Meron tayong dalawa. Tama. Sa rolling a die, ilan yung sample space natin? Meron tayong 6. Now, sir, ano naman yung sample point? Sample point is just one of the possible outcomes. So, for example, when you flip a coin, meron tayong sample space na dalawa. Sir, ano yung sample point doon? Pwede siyang head. Yun lang, isa lang doon sa dalawa. Sir, paano pag rolling a die? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Mamili ka lang doon ng isa. Yun po yung sample point na sinasabi doon. You are pointing one possible outcome only. Now, let's proceed to the next slide. Here we have an example. So, example na tayo. So experiments, sample space, and sample point. So, per experiments, we have flipping two coins. So, pag naghagis daw tayo or we toss two coins, dalawa, parang sa Cara Cruz. Diba? Pwedeng lumabas dun is the head and head. Pwedeng tail, head, or tail, tail, and head, tail. So, yung sample point dun, pwede kahit saan dyan sa apat. Pero nilagay ko dito is head and head. Rolling a die. So, pwede dun. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yung sample space natin dun, which is 6. And pwedeng lumabas dun is 5. And flipping a coin and rolling a die simultaneously. So, pagka-toss mo daw ng coin, ginulong mo yung die natin. So, this is the possible sample space or the possible outcomes. So, head 1, head 2, head 3, head 4, head 5, and head 6. Or maybe we can produce a tail 1, tail 2, tail 3, tail 4, tail 5, or tail 6. But the sample point that I'll put here is tail and 3. So, pwedeng T, 3. Yun po yung possible na experiments natin. And for our last example of the possible experiments is drawing a card from a deck of 52 cards. Sir, bakit 52? Di ba pwedeng 54 yan? Yes, pwedeng pag sinaba natin yung dalawang joker. Pero sometimes, we do not include the joker. Okay? We only focus for the 13 diamonds, 13 hearts, 13 spades, and 13 clubs. Sir, ano po yung compose ng 13 na yon? Ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and Jack, Queen, King. So, my sample point here is only one, which is the Queen of Hearts. So, later on, we will be focusing more examples. Okay? Kung paano natin siya makukuha naman ngayon. Now, let's proceed kung paano natin siya makukuha. Sir, paano makukuha? So, there are 4 ways in determining the possible outcomes. So, 4. Gaya nga nung nasabi sa ating learning competency, we can use table, tree diagram, systematic listing, and lastly, the fundamental counting principles. Okay, now let's proceed or let's try to find the possible outcomes in different ways. So, let's start with table. Here's the problem. Find the possible outcome of flipping 1 peso coin and rolling a die. So, gaya nung kaninang experiment natin. So, pero tignan po natin siya in a table way. So, ito po. 'Di ba? Yung parang example natin kanina. So, ito po yung table natin. From the first column or first row, so, meron tayong 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And for our first column, meron tayong heads and tail. So, tapat-tapat lang po yung pwede nating maging possible outcomes. So, therefore, our sample space here is, yun nga. So, we have 12 possible outcomes. So, hindi ko na po siya isa-isahin kasi nasabi ko na rin po siya kanina doon sa examples. Okay? So, later on, pakita naman tayo ng pag nag-toss tayo ng dalawang coin at nag-roll tayo ng dalawang dice. O, di ba? Or, nag-toss tayo ng isang coin pero nag-roll tayo ng dalawang dice. Pwede rin nag-toss tayo ng dalawang coin pero nag-roll lang tayo ng isang die. Okay? All of that examples will be explained in our video conference. So, before that, now let's try to find out naman if we use 3 diagram with the same problem. So, this is the possible outcome if we toss a coin. Then, here's the possible outcome if we roll a die. And lastly, here's our sample space. So, first, in tossing a coin, we have only 2. We have the head and tail. So, umpisa na muna natin sa head. And here's the possible outcome if we roll a die. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, pag kinonect natin si head kay 1, pwede tayong magkaroon ng head 1. Same as head 2, head 3, head 4, head 5, and head 6. Now, ano pa po yung isang possible effect na pwedeng lumabas? So, possible, we have the tail. So, possible outcome for rolling a die is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, if we connect tail to 1, so we have tail 1. Same as tail 2, tail 3, tail 4, tail 5, and tail 6. So, here's our sample space. So, we have 12 possible outcomes. Sir, paano po nalaman yung 12 possible outcomes? Bilangin mo lahat ng sample space mo. So, 6 sa head, 6 sa tail. So, 6 plus 6, we have 12. So, we're now done with 2. which is the table, and which is the tree diagram. Now, we're proceeding with the systematic listing. So, ganito naman po yung systematic listing. So, flipping a coin, sulat mo lang po kung ano yung mga pwedeng possible result. We have the head and tail. Sulat mo rin po yung rolling a die. We have to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And lastly, ito na po siya lahat. I-combine mo lang siya. So, the same as we have 12 possible outcomes. So, meron na po tayong tatlong pinakita. At nakita ko po sa inyo, meron na kayong pinagpipilian kung anong way ang gagamitin nyo to find all the possible outcomes. So, nakadepende sa inyo kung saan kayo madadalian. Okay po. Now, let's proceed with the fundamental counting principle, which is the last way. Okay? So, the counting principle tells that total outcome of experiments, 1, followed by the experiment 2. Sir, ano yung 1 na tinutukoy doon? Which is the tossing a coin. Yung experiment 2 na tinutukoy doon is yung rolling a die. Can be found by multiplying the number of ways each experiment can happen. So, ito po, parang madali lang siya, sir, naririnig ko. So, i-multiply mo lang daw po yung possible outcome na makikita mo kay heads at yung possible outcomes na makikita mo kay die. So, tingnan natin. Tossing a coin has 2 possible outcomes, which is the head and the tail. And rolling a die has 6 possible outcomes, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, therefore, the 2 experiments together, tossing a coin, then rolling a die, have 2 times 6, which is 12 possible outcomes. Sir, yan po yata yung pinakamadali, which is, we will only multiply the 2 experiments. Yes. So, the answer here is 12 ways or 12 possible outcomes. So, 4 na po yung pinakita kong ways. So, mamili na lang po tayo kung saan po tayo madadalian. Table, tree diagram, systematic listing, or the FCP or the fundamental counting principle. Now, here's the examples for the 4. Pili na lang po kayo, pero I'll be focusing na lang po sa pinakamadali, which is the fundamental counting principle. So, here's our first example. So, answer the following problems, use of their methods. Mamili kayo, table, tree diagram, systematic listing, fundamental counting principle in finding the possible outcomes. Pero sabi ko nga sa inyo, I will be using fundamental counting principle kasi mas madali lang po siya totally. So, here's, Mia is flipping a coin and rolling 2 dice. How many possible outcomes are possible? So, how many outcomes are possible? So, ilan po yung posibleng lalabas na sagot? So, first, here's our answer. 2. Sir, saan nanggaling yung 2? Yung 2 na tinutukoy ko doon is yung flipping a coin. Yung 6 plus 6, 6 first is the first die. Kasi 2 dice po yung tinutukoy natin dito. For the second die is 6 din. So, 6 plus 6, we have 12. So, lumabas po, doon sa second equation natin is 2 times 12. So, 2 times 12 is 24 outcomes. Sir, yun na po yun. Yun na po yun. Kasi yung ilang outcomes lang po yung hahanapin natin dito. Okay. So, next. Here's our example number 2. How many possible outcomes are there if you flip 2 coins and roll 2 dice? O, yan yung sinasabi ko sa inyo kanina. 2 coin na daw po, tas 2 dice. So, pakita natin yung answer. So, first, 2 plus 2. Sir, saan nanggaling yung 2 plus 2? 2 coin. Sir, bakit naging 2 plus 2? Kaya naging 2. So, sa first coin, 2 yung possible outcome. Doon sa second coin, 2 rin yung possible outcome. So, 2 plus 2. Same as 6 plus 6 na pwede naman lumabas kay rolling at 2 dice. So, 4 times 12 na yung magiging sagot natin. So, 4 times 12 is 48 outcomes. So, ganun lamang po yun. Now, let's proceed to our last example here in our video lesson. So, later on in our video conference, more example, more thrilling, more fun. Okay? So, here's our last example. At 1 topping pizza comes in 3 sizes. So, may 3 size daw sila. So, with thin or thick crust. So, mamimili ka kung thin crust or thick crust. So, yung thin manipis, syempre yung thick makapal. And choice of 7 toppings. How many different pizzas are possible? So, ilan daw pizza ang pwedeng ma-compose with 3 sizes, thin or thick, or with the 7 toppings? Different. So, mamimili ka lang ng isang toppings doon. So, first, let's identify the sizes. Pwede siyang small, medium, large. We can Choose from the crust of thin or thick. And lastly, here's our toppings. Cheese, ham, pineapple, beef, pepperoni, sausage, or mushroom. So, mamimili ka na lang doon. And next, here's our sample space. So, as you can see, napakarami. So, yung SCT or yung S doon stands for the small. Yung C stands for the cheese. And yung T na maliit stands for the thin. Okay? So, same as follow. So, makikita nyo po doon yung ham, pineapple, beef, pepperoni, sausage, mushroom with the size of small and the crust of thin. So, same as the medium and large. Pero pagdating po dito, small siya with a cheese and a thick crust. So, all of that, if you multiply it of all, you will have 42 different pizzas. Sir, paano po naging 42? Saan po nangyari yon? So, first thing, sa size natin, ilan siya? 3. Sa crust natin, ilan siya? 2. So, 3 times 2, we have 6. Now, we have 7 choices of toppings. So, 6 times 7 is 42 different pizzas. So, ganun na lang po siya. So, depende po kung ano yung ilan yung pwedeng different ways in finding the possible outcomes. Yun po yung probability. So, I hope marami pa kang tanong sa inyo. Reserba po natin yung mga tanong. So, I will see you in our video conference. More example, more thrilling, and more fun. So, that's for all. Thank you, everyone, and see you again later. Goodbye.